Dear colleagues and esteemed guests, good morning and a warm welcome to you all. It is my distinct pleasure to have you all here today for the Translating Europe workshop on translation and usability, an event that promises to enrich our understanding and practices in the field of translation. As we gather in this historic and vibrant city, in the oldest university in the western part of Romania, we are united by a shared passion for enhancing the accessibility and usability of translations in our increasingly interconnected world. As the Dean of the Faculty of Communication Sciences and Director of Politehnica Center for Advanced Translation Studies, I am particularly thrilled to see so many bright minds gathered here to explore the complex relationship between translation and usability. Our faculty is dedicated to advancing communication in all its forms, and today's workshop aligns perfectly with our mission to break down barriers and foster effective cross-cultural and multilingual communication. The theme of this workshop, translation and usability, underscores the importance of not just translating words, but enhancing the user experience. In our digital age, where information is at our fingertips and interactions span the globe, it is imperative that our translations meet the highest standards of usability. This means considering how users interact with translated content, ensuring clarity, accessibility, and user satisfaction. I would like to express my gratitude to the team of organizers for their hard work in bringing this event to fruition. Dear colleagues, your efforts made it possible for us to come together and learn from each other's experiences and innovations. I also extend my thanks to the keynote speakers, workshop managers, and participants who will share their valuable insights and expertise. I am also extremely thankful to Dejica, which funded the event, and in particular to Daniela Vadia, Dejica Outreach Officer and a good friend, who provided valuable support in the application process. Last but not least, I would like to thank our rector, Professor Florin Dragan, for accepting to host and co-fund the event. I encourage you all to take full advantage of the opportunities to network, engage in stimulating discussions, and think critically about how we can improve our translation practices. Let this workshop be a platform for creativity, collaboration, and the exchange of groundbreaking ideas. Welcome to Timișoara, dear friends, welcome to our university, and welcome to a day of discovery and learning. Let us make the most of it. Thank you. Okay. With that, we consider the workshop is open. We will start with the first session. We have two invited guests who give plenaries. And I would like to give the floor to Professor Kirk, who is the first plenary speaker.
Thank you.
And I would also like to introduce Professor Kirk. So, Professor St. Amant is a professor and the Eunice C. Williamson Chair in Technical Communication at Louisiana Tech University, where he serves as the Director of Louisiana's Tech Center for Health and Medical Communication. He is also an Adjunct Professor of Health and Medical Communication with the University of Limerick in Ireland and a Research Fellow in User Experience Design with the University of Strasbourg in France. His research focuses on usability in international health and medical contexts, global health literacy, and developing health and medical products patients in different cultures so that they can use them effectively, easily, and efficiently. Thank you, Professor St. Amant. Dear Kirk, the floor is yours.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today. Everybody speaks with an accent, and everyone comes from a region. And the reason I mention this is I come from a particular part of the United States, the American South, where we have a very, very difficult accent. And so what I have to do every time I visit abroad is I watch BBC for 24 hours just so I can sound normal. But if I ever start to slip into something and you say, that's not English, someone please let me know. So in my local dialect, you'd be like, "Dayo, have a moment." So I sound like Elvis, basically. I work in the area of usability and design. Specifically, I work in design psychology. And that is, how do different designs cause specific behaviors reflexively and automatically? And one of the things that we discovered working with engineers, product designers, and software developers, our translation is a key component in the production of any product, any good. And what I'd like to do today is to talk about that from the perspective of usability and design psychology. So let's talk a bit about positioning translation, just based upon observations. And that is, historically, and in many cases culturally, when you look at the product development process, it's built in such a way that the product development process happens at one point in time. And unfortunately, translation within that process is viewed as an and. It's not a part of the product development process. It's something else that happens after the process is done. And for those of you who work in translation or localization, this is frustrating because quite often someone will build a product that it is very difficult to translate for or very difficult to localize because it's been built in such a way that that's a very impossible proposition. So what I've been proposing and what I advocate and would ask you to advocate for as translators is shifting that relationship. It's technical translation as product development. And that is, translators are not an add-on or a separate service that happens after something is built. They're a fundamental principal part of the process, and they must be incorporated into it from the very beginning. And the reason for that argument and the reason for this situation is a misconception of what translation is. So for many people, translation is viewed in terms of understanding. Do you understand the information that's being provided to you? Yes, I do. That leaves out the most crucial component of translation, and that's application. Yes, I understand the words you are using to tell me something, but I can also use that information to perform a process as I need it to. A surgeon can explain to me how to perform a heart transplant, and I can understand it. That doesn't mean I'm able to use that information to perform a heart transplant. That's a fundamental difference that many product developers forget. And so for me, translation and usability are one and the same thing. Translation must be, and is a fundamental component to making something usable from the very beginning. It must be an initial part of the product development process. And to try to illustrate this, I'd like to talk a bit about what individuals in my field do. And that is, we specialize in behavior. How certain signals, signs, images, prompts automatically make you behave in a certain way. The development of a reflex, if you will. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm obsessed with mobile phones. So there'll be a lot of mobile phone examples in this. But when you think about the process of using a mobile phone to make a phone call, it illustrates this sort of reflexive process driven by design that affects translation and localization. You take out your mobile phone and you find a stimulus, an image, an icon. The moment you see it, it reflexively causes you to do something. It prompts an action or a behavior. You see it automatically, you do something. But for every action, we subconsciously expect a corresponding reaction, which means after I perform the activity, some change must happen. Some new design must appear that indicates I performed the process successfully. From a psychology perspective, we call this a trigger stimulus starts a process, an automatic reflexive process. And that design, that trigger stimulus, doesn't just cause any process. It causes a very specific, predictable activity to happen. But the moment that activity happens, we expect something called a terminal stimulus, a change, some other design feature that indicates the process has been performed, and we stop. From a very simple perspective, it is, there's an on switch, the behavior it causes, and the off switch that stops it. Start, process, stop. Believe it or not, this is how our minds organize information. This is a basic reflexive process that 90% of our daily activity is based upon. Humans are driven 90% by reflexive processes caused by designs. Now, the reason that's important is this task, which is a fundamental unit of behavior, is also the most basic unit of technical content. So for technical writers or document developers or even software developers, this is the foundational unit they work with. This is the first step in an instruction. For those of you who work in translation or localization, this is the same fundamental unit that you work with when you translate an instructional text, or when you get to localize something. Now, what's interesting about this reflexive process is how powerful it is. If I know what starts something and what stops it, I can control somebody subconsciously. I have a volunteer that I've asked to help me with something. Could you please just illustrate a point? Come on down. I promise you won't be hurt.
Volunteer. Volunteer is the nominated volunteer.
Or actually, come. And I'm only using him because, as my dean told me, don't use faculty, they sue. Can you just stay there, please?
Okay, here?
Yes. We haven't practiced this before, right?
Here, so that you are on camera.
Oh, sorry. Hazard. Stay there, please. Now, we haven't practiced anything at all, right?
Right.
Cool.
Correct.
Now, notice something. Without any practice, I can make him behave. Now, notice, this is this process. On switch, action, off switch. So, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
That's it.
No hypnosis?
This was easy for a copy. You owe me a copy.
Yes, I will, but not a cappuccino. But this is the fundamental design process. This is how we work. And as most of you are involved in cultural perspectives, you realize that these are culturally driven semiotic signs, which means that if I don't realize that to begin with, I can't trigger the same behavior. So if I'm from a different cultural context and I use different symbols to stop the process, nothing happens. So this is the first place in which translators must be involved in the most fundamental designs, because they understand the semiotics of communication, language plus everything that comes with it that's behavioral. So this is what this entire premise is based upon. And this is where translators have to be a part of global marketing information to know the parts of the reflex. Which is why the very first time you encounter something, you need a lot of descriptive text or a lot of descriptive language to explain it. That language has to explain, these are the parts. Identify the call phone app icon, which looks like this and is positioned at this point on your phone. You need information that provides the behavior. When you see this icon, tap it once with your finger and wait for 5 seconds. And you need information that talks you through the entire process. The keypad should appear at this point in time. When you see the keypad, you have successfully completed the operation. Please stop tapping the app. Now, it sounds very simple because this is a reflexive process for all of us, but this is the actual information we need to build the process. And if it's a brand new product or a brand new process, this is the explicit wording someone needs to be provided with to build the reflex. Now, as a species, we have this amazing ability to create reflexive behavior after 2 or 3 times. It's something that makes us unique as a species. So notice, the second time you do something, the amount of text you need to explain it is less, because the fundamental framework has been built the first time. So I can simply say, find call app, tap once, wait for number pad, stop. Reduce text moving forward. And again, the greater the level of familiarity, the greater the number of iterations, the more reduced the text becomes. Or it can simply be icons. Find, tap, stop. And at some point, it's a self-obvious process. It's reflex. None of us needs instruction right now to make a call on our phone. But that's only because all of the previous iterations have provided us with pre-existing information to build the foundation we scaffold upon. This is where translators become incredibly important. Because for most products going globally, particularly in the American market, there's a tendency to build at this level or to write documentation at this level. Most people are already familiar with it, therefore we need minimal text, not a problem. But then you introduce that product to a different global market that's never seen it before. And they need that level of text because the reflex doesn't exist. It hasn't been built. The parts haven't been specified. And for many of you who work in translation, you've probably encountered that. There's not enough information for my audience who's going to try to use something or perform a process. More is needed. So we've got the initial gap. Or if you will, a translator has just discovered a global market share that you need to develop because it's not already there. So a fundamental breakdown. But they become even more interesting based upon semiotics, or do you recognize the different things that start and stop behavior? So let's talk about inconsistencies. Again, humans are nothing more than on switch, action, off switch. When you manipulate the switching systems, when you manipulate the signs, you change the behavior. If I change the trigger stimulus that starts something, I won't prompt the behavior. It's impossible. Which, if any of you work in localization, you might have seen this. Yes, that icon might work for you, but no one here recognizes it. Well, yes, there is that icon, but it means a different thing here. So we've got the very first point in product development. Your product won't work here. Why not? You can't start the right behavior. On switch, action, off switch. Now this is something that, in many cases, software developers are known to do. Because they've worked with something so many times, they forget they've got to add both the on and the off switch to a behavior. Everyone has done this at least once. An app on your mobile phone that you tap, an icon on your desktop that you click, and there's no off switch, there's no change. What do you automatically do? You tap it again, and again, and again. How many people have clicked the same app 15 times? And launched the same application 15 times. But it's a classic example of oversight because people don't understand the underlying cultural behavioral systems that language operates on. Translators understand this fundamentally because you're experts in language and in culture, one and the same. There's got to be an off switch. And again, like everything else, it's semiotics. If you manipulate the design of the off switch, you can prevent the behavior from ending. Which is why with so many developments, so many different kinds of products, without realizing this, you can make something unusable, unacceptable, unmarketable, because you don't recognize what's happening. And again, engineers and software designers aren't culture experts. They're specialists in a technology. They need to reach out to people who understand communication, behavior, and language to recognize these factors. So it gets a little bit more complicated, but again, things that you as translators probably know that most developers do not. So again, on switch, action, off switch. Strange thing happens at this point. And again, I am obsessed with mobile phones. This stops one process, but notice something. The process doesn't end there, because this thing that stops one action becomes something that starts another one. I see this, I type in a number, and I realize the number's been received, wait to speak. What's happened here? We have an overlap in semiotic design. The thing that was a terminal stimulus that stopped one behavior is now the trigger stimulus that starts a different behavior, a related one, with a different terminal stimulus. Now here's what's fascinating. Your mind, the first time it performs this process, views this as two separate activities. They're two separate inputs. And over time, for the sake of efficiency, what your mind will do is it will do what's called alignment. It'll take those two processes and align or overlap them, so that you'll think it's just one activity, when in fact it's two, with two very different distinct pieces of criteria. This is called the design cascade. And that is, the design that stops one thing starts another. But again, they're two separate processes. And for technical writers, they need to document or write user documentation that says, step one, start, stop here. Step two, identify from the beginning, this is the starting stimulus, this is the action you perform, this is when you stop it. Two separate processes. This piece in between is called transitional content. And the reason that's important is it's one thing that many developers and designers often forget and often leave out. They don't understand these are two separate activities. They need to be documented and presented as two separate things. Because for a user who's never done it before, they're not going to understand this is an overlap. So again, this is a second area where we see breakdown in development and design, where translators become important. They're essential to realizing something isn't working here to make it usable. So let's apply these ideas. And I wish to apologize in advance to all of you who translate. I will present things, you'll go, oh no, please no. The most common development in a usability design is something called replicated design. And that is, we have an existing product in a specific market, and everybody knows that product. Everybody knows how to use, let's say, Microsoft Word, which means that they already have a set of reflexes in place. There's already a series of stimuli in place that start and stop behaviors. I want to create a competing product in that same market. How do I do it quickly, effectively, and efficiently? Well, again, I'm obsessed with phones. If I want to compete with a company to make my call app a rival to theirs, I know that all the users in that market already have a preset stimulus that starts processes. I know the specific action that stimulus will start, and I know the specific stimulus that stops it. I already know the on and off switches. I don't need to build anything new. I simply need to repeat the design. New product, replicate the design. Replicate the on switch and the off switch. I control the market. I can move in quickly, efficiently, and easily. But again, from a global marketing perspective, what are the on switches and off switches in France, in China, in different parts of India? If I know that in advance, I can build a product that fits beautifully into that market and can compete. But the only way to know that is to interact with people from that market, specialists who understand language, culture, and behavior. And this replicated design is pervasive. For those of us who use Microsoft Word, we all recognize these icons, correct? So when OpenOffice wanted to create a word processing product that competed with it, it didn't create new designs, it replicated. But again, I need to know the pre-existing design. I can't assume that. That's a localization, translation, culture, behavior specialization. Only individuals with that background can do this. Now let's pretend that we're Apple computers. There's something called analogous design. And that is, there's an existing product that I want to wipe out. I have a completely new product, I want to take its place, but it's completely new, so no one knows how to use it. How do I seamlessly get people to adopt a completely new product and get rid of an old technology? And this is, again, where Apple don't seem to dominate the market. My favorite thing, again, phones. Is everyone old enough to remember a regular phone? And notice, I couldn't find a rotary dial phone. But remember, way back before 2008, I think it was, this was how we made phone calls. And then Apple decided, we're going to make phone calls a different way, with something that looks nothing like that works nothing like that, and we're going to make people buy it and use it without having to explain it to them. How in the world do you do that? Well, analogous design, they begin to study things. We've got a pre-existing reflex for making a phone call. What are the stimulus that causes it? Well, it turns out, whenever we make a phone call, the very first thing we look at that starts our brain into the reflex of make a phone call is the receiver to the telephone. If I show that to somebody, it automatically triggers the behavior, make a phone call. And by the way, once you start a reflexive behavior, you can't stop it. That's the beauty of a reflex. So what did Apple use for its call phone icon? That's why this exists. Because they discovered that, hey, this triggers the same reflex for make phone call, so people are already thinking about doing the correct thing. So what's the next step in the process? What's the next design that triggers continue phone call? It's the keypad. Which means if I want to get them started and keep them along the process to keep the reflex going for a complex behavior, I simply create similar designs. So again, it's called analogous design because it's a completely new product. It doesn't need to have these things. It doesn't even have this thing. But I'm manipulating existing reflexes to prompt an existing behavior. That's what's going on. Now notice, again, this is all culturally dependent. If you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the stimuli that trigger the behavior, you can't compete in that market. And again, this is an amazingly pervasive process for new technologies. My guess is many of you recognize a digital blood pressure cuff, where you put it on and it measures your blood pressure. And notice the design, this is a medical device. It's designed in such a way that it's, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, pulse rate, notice the order, and notice there's a little color scale that indicates how healthy you are. If I want to build an Apple Watch or a health watch that's got an app for blood pressure on it, I replicate the design. Again, systolic, diastolic, pulse rate, color spectrum that indicates level of health. The moment I provide people with something they know, they can use a new technology seamlessly. But again, it's all culturally bound. And it requires you to figure out something called an accidental analogous overlap. That is, oh, this doesn't exist in our culture, so it doesn't exist anywhere else, right? No. Someone want to tell me what's wrong with these designs? What's wrong with this one to begin with?
Color code.
Okay. So even though you can read the text, the reflexive process is driven by color, so there's going to be a disaster here. But again, the designer didn't know that. Different culture, different set of expectations. What's problematic about this design? So the colors are right, the wording is right, but the order is wrong. So again, it's something that if I'm not aware this is a facet, what are the facets of design that cause behavior? This will cause problems. And again, I can't know that as a developer. That's not my area. I need to turn to people who understand culture, language, and behavior to do that. Now this is the worst one, I'm sorry. Informed design. I have a product that is completely new. No one has ever seen anything like this before. It's not going to replace an existing product. It's unique in and of itself. There is no existing reflex to build on, which means I need to teach my user to create a reflex by using something. Again, I love phones. Let's give them an app. Can anyone tell me what this app does?
A magic spell.
Cool. The witchcraft app. Yes. Other guesses?
Drawing app.
Cool, it's a drawing app. This is for art and design. Anyone else?
Relaxation.
Cool. All sorts of ideas.
It's a star.
It's an app for accessing the internet, because these are the different nodes in the connection. Informed design is the design has to have language built into it that explains what it is and how you use it. Tap to access internet. Every translator in the room just went, because text expansion is going to be a problem, right? So we've got a very fundamental level. Hey guys, if you want to make this a global product, you've got to fix that design, because there are languages that are not going to fit in the context of it. So from the very beginning, you can make something globally marketable or kill its global chances. But again, it's a reflex. We have an on switch, the action it causes, and an off switch, what appears to cause it. Guess what? We've got to put more informed design in. On switch, off switch. Great, I've got a concluding stimulus, what do I do with it? Guess what? We have to build in more text. Here's what we put in to explain to individuals how to use something. All the translators in the room, can we figure out at least 3 things wrong with that text?
What's return?
Cool. So can you tell this was written by someone who worked with computers before 1984? Again, the text expansion is a problem. Some of the verbal constructions.
Press return.
My father went to a conference and never came back. But again, it's built in. Again, on switch, action, off switch, on switch, action, off switch. What do we do with this thing? We've got to build the text that explains it into the design. But again, if you note the way that these interfaces are designed, it's for a very specific language speaking group with a very specific perspective on what's happening. The ability to globalize this product is very limited because they didn't understand the language and cultural factors behind it. At this point, translators have to be involved with the product development process. If not, this product can't go global. And in this current marketplace, you have to go global to survive in many cases. But this is kind of a quick overview of the work that we do where I am, why we think translation is essential to product development. And while I think everyone's mission needs to be that it's not translation and product development, it's translation as product development, always and forever. And translators need to be a very fundamental part of product development because they add value from the very beginning. Thank you all very much for your patience in my acrobatics. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Professor St. Amant, for a very enriching speech, enriching presentation. We have plenty of time for questions, comments, so the floor is yours. I'm sure that Walter is going to pop up the first question. No, I'm wrong. You made the sign, so.
I'm manufacturing it.
Okay, okay. Please, yeah.
So,
Oh, we also have a mic.
I will try it the old-fashioned way.
I can hear you.
Yes. So my question would be: do the industry come to you and ask you to help them out, or what's the connection between academia and industry? Do they follow your advice? Do they know about it extensively? Or?
Usually it's a series of processes. Quite often they come to me the first time something has failed. And then they want to know, well, what has failed, why has it failed? And that's when we can take them through this process. Now please note, the process I used to illustrate this, and I'm happy to share these slides with anybody who wants them. Break it down into very clear examples that help people understand exactly what the problem is. And that gives me a foundation for explaining from the beginning. You understand the problem, what's causing it. Now let's talk about why your translators have to be there in the room with your engineers or your software developers from the very beginning, because they can make this happen. And it takes us that first time, that first accident, that first explanation, and suddenly they realize, oh yeah, I get it now. Because it's so much easier to build it once and make it easy to modify than build it once and have to build a completely new version and a completely new version. So that's what usually happens. We built enough credibility, and that's simply because I work in a Politehnica, so I work with engineers. We built enough credibility that now people come to us at the beginning of a project. Hey, we're planning on doing this. Okay, what global markets are you going to look at? Primary, secondary, tertiary. This, and this. Okay, you'll need translators for these languages, and these languages. And one of the things they've come to appreciate is there's a difference between someone who can translate and someone who can speak another language.
Yes.
Because they realize fundamentally, yeah, you need to build it this way because there's a cultural component there.
Right.
So that's helped in many ways. But it's that first mistake. Hey, can I help you with your first mistake? Let me explain to you in terms you understand, very visual terms, because humans are very visual thinkers. Here is what's going on. And this is why translators are so essential.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would also have.
Agnes?
I think I'm loud enough.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I liked your presentation very much, and I so much adhere to that as a translator and as the coordinator of a translation service within a multinational company here in Timișoara. I would like to ask first whether you have a specific use case, a successful use case in software development for this principle applied successfully, because that would be ideal if everyone could understand the importance of how you just presented things for the translator to be positioned. And the second question maybe I'll ask after.
Okay, sure. For the sake of legalities, can we talk about a hypothetical use case? So I don't have to name any specific names.
Is it so it's not real then?
I can't name any specific names.
Okay, but it's real.
I can't name any specific names. Is this being recorded?
Yeah.
Yes. I can't name any specific names.
Okay, I see.
But yeah, so accounting software, let's say. And in that case, many accounting softwares are layers of drop-down menus that occur. And you'll quite quickly see with drop-down menus, text expansion is the death of a company every time. This drops down, you've only got this much room in a box. Oh, when you filled every slot in the menu bar, you haven't accounted for every accounting process globally. Which means that for this client in this country, and Walter is a much better expert on this than I, you need to include this tab with these things. And these tabs over here, you remove this tab, you modify this tab to have 7 more entries. This tab needs to be expanded because the term in this language takes six different words to say. So there have been examples of, oh yeah, with global, especially with global financial reporting, you need to have these kinds of things in place. We realize we've made a mistake. We need to go back and from the beginning figure out how to build this. And with software, it's really easy for the most part. You just code it to shift around different parts and pieces to change those designs versus hardwire it in so the coding has to be completely rewritten. Did that help answer your question, ma'am?
Yes.
Thank
yes,
you.
Thank you. So at least one company, hopefully, then or several, I'm sure. But it's great that this idea is embraced and it's understood. And the second question has to do, obviously, I think, or it would arise to AI. How do you see AI coming into this picture? Because I think we all see how it's making it somehow dangerous to a certain extent for the translation industry, and how people start to fear about losing their jobs. So considering it, making it that important could be a paradigm shift, maybe, if this could be understood. And
excellent question. So here's the big thing. Most AI platforms that deal with language, whether it's ChatGPT or Google Translate or whatever it is, the base it's building upon are language models, large language models, right? So you're looking at the frequency of things occurring in a language. These are behavioral attributes, not language models. So it's language is nothing more than a reflection of behavior. So if you understand, we're not talking about language, we're talking about behavior in a specific culture towards a certain thing. As to my knowledge, there's no AI out there yet that can replicate behavior, because there's no, like you have large language models for language, there's no large behavioral model to pull from. There's no large model of reflexive processes AI can yet draw from. So because of that, that's why I advocate translators specialize in culture, behavior, and language, and emphasizing the behavioral part. Yes, you can use this text, but this text is nothing more than a reflection of underlying behavior, driven by underlying reflexive processes that I understand, and that this machine doesn't, because it's not designed to aggregate behavior to come up with a consistent norm.
do you predict large behavior models or something?
They might be, but they're difficult. Number one, they're incredibly time consuming. It's one thing to, for Google to aggregate text and dump it into or to do a web search, web crawl, and aggregate text and say, here's this massive language. I don't know how you would code AI at this point in time to search for behavior. What would the common programming cores be to identify behaviors? And if you're going to do behavior, then you need to know what starts it, what stops it. Where's the behavior overlap? Where is there a design cascade? So it's one behavior that might trigger another one or might trigger a different one. That's an incredibly difficult proposition to program at this time, and I don't think it's yet cost effective. So that's why I keep advocating it's a behavioral thing, because at present it's just not effective to start doing large language model AI for behavioral aggregation. At some point it might be, and it might happen as more motion capture becomes a part of, say, video gaming, and they can start to break down those behaviors. But at this point, it's just not cost effective. Did answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Thank you for the presentation. As working as a freelancer, I often come across a situation that you receive a text to translate somewhere in between the process, where there is already a glossary, which very often is incorrect, or uses, for the sake of consistency, the same term everywhere it appears, which is also incorrect. Often you don't get the necessary context as a freelance translator. Do you have any input on how to make companies trust you enough
Right.
to give you the entire context, and because it's very frustrating. You get a short little text, you are paid peanuts for it,
Yeah.
and of course it won't fit.
Right.
And I often had the situation that I asked specifically, because I'm not very sure on which website or how you are going to use these things.
Yeah.
Could you please give a feedback afterwards? It almost never comes.
So I think the trick I've learned that seems to work is, again, many companies now understand the concept of usability, and they'll pay good money for it. So if you start presenting it, this isn't a translation issue, this is an end user issue, this is a usability issue, this is a product development flaw. If you begin to use that terminology, suddenly they realize that, oh, so this is more than just, forgive me for saying this is more than just language. Yeah, it's a lot more than just language. It's, usability and market share. So it's simply learning to ask questions with the terminology that they associate value with.
Educate the client in this way.
Yep. And again, the more you talk about, like I said, I always focus on behavior because you can easily argue language models can't do this. Software can't do this yet. Software can't run usability testing yet. That kind of helps speak the language of the client, understand what actually is happening, and more importantly, what actually you do. You're an expert in end user design. And to get that end user design successful, I need this from you.
Yeah.
Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, very
Thank
much.
you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? I would like just to add what Kirk said, that artificial intelligence needs a certain point when to start and when to stop. In other words, we need a human intelligence to program the artificial intelligence and to validate the output. And we had similar discussions here in Timișoara at the doctoral school as well. I think that we should not fear for the moment, but we should fear the moment when artificial intelligence A is able to program artificial intelligence B and validate the output, the behavior. We don't know, nobody knows. In a recent workshop I attended, some experts said that it will not happen very soon, because the artificial intelligence needs, actually it was papers with Walter, your colleague said, the artificial intelligence needs huge amount of data, unbelievably huge to do this, which we do not have actually the hardware equipment, we do not have the processing power. So for the moment, let's say we are safe, but sometimes in the future it might happen. So we need to know what we did in the past centuries to adapt ourselves, to reinvent ourselves. And this will impact the teaching process, the learning process, the way translators are doing their job and so on. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much, Kirk, for the presentation.